War Eagle Auburn family, and welcome back to another edition of E2C Network Live, where we get together, we sit down, and we talk about what's going on in the world of the Auburn family spectrum. Of course, we're always heavy on those Auburn sports here, but if it's orange and blue, it is what we do. Thank you so much for joining us and being here for yet another live stream. It has been a busy week, folks, here at E2C Network Central. Firings, hirings, interims, ADs, football games, and basketball is now just getting started, which is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to consider this our official, I guess, preview and prediction show for the Auburn men's basketball season for 2022-23. We're going to offer up a little look at the schedule, the roster, prospects maybe for the future, and love to hear some of your comments and your questions as we go throughout the stream tonight. And of course, I have a special guest here who we'll introduce in just a second. Before you get started with all that, though, make sure you smash that like button as you come into the stream, whether you're watching on the replay or live, and post right now where you're watching from, city, state, or if you're international, that as well with a War Eagle. Let us know that you are here hanging out with us on this live stream. I'd like to introduce my special guest here. It's a guy I've gotten to know, followed their podcast for a little while now, Mr. Matt Donaldson of the Jungle Podcast, exclusively about Auburn basketball. It is very easy to talk about Auburn basketball these days, and so I'm happy to have someone on there that's made a podcast specifically about that, so we can hone in on that and really talk about something that no matter where you're at in your journey with Auburn football right now, I think we all agree Auburn basketball is still in an amazing time. So, Matt, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Happy to be here. Obviously, this is a busy time, like you said, maybe busier last week than you expected. For us in our little world, we stick just to basketball and leave the all-inclusive stuff to great people like you. And we're really excited to kick off this second season of our podcast and been lifelong Auburn basketball fans. So obviously, like you mentioned, it's still a bit surreal that this is where Bruce Pearl has the program, and it's just cool to see all the attention and just how excited the Auburn family really gets for basketball season now. It's awesome.
Well, we'll just get started with this comment. 40-0 is what he's calling. I don't even know if we have 40 games on the schedule. Unbeaten Lake says 40-0. I don't know about that, but what I do know is we're going to be in for a fun season. I do love that you pointed out that you are focused on one specific thing, because there are times, my friend, I wish that was all I did. I have no time. I have no sleep. Like last night, I think technically I stayed up to 3 a.m. getting things done and prepped from the night before. Thankfully, we all had that extra hour of sleep. It's tough sometimes out there in this wide world of Auburn stuff. So sometimes doing what you do, focusing on something specifically, is the right way to go. So I applaud you for that.
Yeah, we just wanted to add to the basketball focus around Auburn athletics. You know, as this has happened, my buddy Jackson and I used to talk on the phone after every game for 30 minutes or an hour and just talk, catch up, kind of like you do with your people who engage with you here. And we're just like, maybe we should start recording it. So that's where we've started, definitely from a fan perspective, and but people who have followed the program for a long time. And I think we have some fun banter and just kind of some unique things we do. So really excited to kick off another year. It's hard. It always sneaks up on you, though, in the fall. You know, you've got football and everything going on. And all of a sudden, blink, and here's the season opener tomorrow.
It's crazy. I mean, people forget that we've already had an exhibition game already. Like, that's already happened. And, you know, mainly that's because it wasn't on television. Although I will tell you, there was a bit of a frenzy here on our Wednesday night live show. People were screaming at me. It was like, oh, it's on TV, Kyle. I was like, no, it's not. You're looking at the broadcast of Andy, and that for that game, it was Brad Law broadcasting their call. They're not going to show the game. No, Kyle, you don't understand. No, I promise you, don't get my hopes up. There is no basketball game being broadcast on YouTube tonight. But thankfully, as long as you've got the right provider this season, I did a quick scan of the schedule this season. I think every game is technically on a major network in terms of, like, you know, SEC Network Plus, the CBS Sports Network, but then, of course, SEC Network General, ESPN, CBS. So we are talking about an era of Auburn basketball where you do not have to search to find a way to watch it. You don't have to scrounge for a ticket to go see them actually play. What a time to be alive. I'm sure you remember the Tony Barbie era, the bad parts of the Lebo era. It's really different, isn't it?
Totally different. I was actually in school at Auburn during both of those, so can definitely relate a lot to that. I remember even going back. I grew up in Texas, and back then, we would get 8-ish football games a year to watch on TV, even in Texas before there was any SEC footprint out there. Basketball, you're talking maybe once or twice a year when they played Kentucky, and maybe another game or two that we could watch out there. So you're absolutely right. The accessibility to these games, I think, has really played into the growing interest, and it's awesome. Now, are you going to have to potentially splurge for ESPN Plus like I did yesterday for a month to catch some of these non-conference games? Yeah. But for $10 a month, that's a small price to pay to watch this team as they start out their journey this year.
I'll tell you what, it's a lot cheaper than some of them ticket prices out there just to get into a Texas Southern game. I believe that's the game we've got coming up this week, or some other non-conference team that you would normally look at it on the schedule and you go, oh, those will be easy to get tickets. No, my friends, not anymore. Unless you got some, money to throw around, it is hard to come by Auburn basketball tickets in Auburn Arena, but even on the road, because that was the trick last year. Everybody was like, hey, go to Athens. The tickets are cheap there. Nobody wants to go to the Georgia Bulldog games. Well, now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, Auburn Tiger fans want to go to the away games to watch a basketball team. What does Bruce call us? His witnesses? Isn't that what he calls when we go on the road? I think that's
he wants witnesses in all the road arenas. So, and it's happening. You're right. I mean, I live in Nashville, and huge stuff happening with the local Auburn club getting ready for the trip to Vanderbilt on a Saturday. They play in Knoxville on a Saturday. The game in Athens you mentioned, I think that's after New Year's on a Wednesday night, but kind of in that holiday season, first week of the year. So you're right. If you want to see this team and you're maybe not in Auburn or in Lee County or in Alabama even, you may have to pick a couple games on the road to go watch. But as I've done that, there is just a growing number of Auburn fans making those trips, which is, again, something, 10 years ago, I just would have never believed it.
Yeah, it is. It's the evolution of this. We started doing E2C Network right before Bruce Pearl got here. And the reason we started kind of moving out into a network format was to cover that in more detail. Here's like, even if this flames out with Bruce Pearl, it's going to be fun to start off with. So we got to cover it in a little bit more detail, a little bit more focused than trying to do just everything in one single show like we used to do. And I'm happy that we did that because it has been such a fun ride with some low points too. People forget that there were some dark days, especially those first 3 years or so, where it nothing was kind of seeming to go right except for a few exciting moments. We would beat Kentucky. We made that magical run in the SEC tournament the first year. But now here we are, where I think we can definitively say, Matt, without being homers, orange and blue glasses, that the Auburn Tigers are officially a blue blood. Is that a fair statement to say, or am I still wearing my orange and blue glasses?
Well, I think it all depends on what you define that as, right? Like, and I love following Bruce's program because he just gives you this great insight in just a standard press conference. And I remember one time he talked about the importance of being a top half SEC program the way the SEC is right now in basketball. If you're a top half consistently, in the SEC, you're going to be in tournaments and you're going to be competing for those championship opportunities and those double buys in the SEC tournament. And I think what Auburn has done, minus the year with Sharif and where everything got a little weird, is Auburn has established itself as one of those top half, maybe top 4, top 5 programs in the league. And there's a lot of competition in that space, right? I mean, Kentucky is who they are. Arkansas has been pretty consistent. They're fighting for that space. Tennessee's been pretty consistent. Maybe not when they play Auburn, but otherwise they've won a lot of games. Alabama's been in and out of there. So there's a lot of competition, I think, with the strength of the league now. And so if you're talking about, has Auburn arrived there? I think yes. From a national perspective, I think there's going to need to be a little more look, you can't argue with all the multiple SEC regular season titles, winning the SEC tournament, being number 1 last year. All those things are building the program nationally. But you know how it is. Like, it's just hard to get national people to kind of think Auburn's there in a lot of different sports. And so I think that part is still being built.
Absolutely. We've got Neil who says he's already making his plans to be at the Memphis AU game here in Atlanta. I actually need to get on getting tickets before they run out and jack up in price even further. I went to, I think it was last year, the Nebraska game here. It was my first game getting to see Jabari in person, wow. I mean, he had a game that day too. It was weird and surreal to see the Auburn Tigers in a neutral mega event like that. And listen, the holiday hoops giving, which is what they're in, it's not the biggest of the holiday events, but it's kind of getting up there. I mean, they're attracting Auburn now and Memphis, and they're attracting a lot of other big names there, or traditionally big names in basketball to be a part of this thing. So the fact that, you're seeing Auburn, people are wanting to have you there, not just to fill a spot, but because you're Auburn, because you're Bruce Pearl, because they know that Auburn travels well. I mean, we've reiterated this several times. It's just a weird but awesome time to be an Auburn basketball fan. And I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. We are so thankful for Bruce Pearl and what he's brought to us as part of our culture now within the Auburn family. Let's dive a little bit into this actual season, though. So kind of our agenda for folks listening would be we're going to go, obviously, maybe a little into season outlook here, looking at the roster maybe a little bit, and then we'll dive into some schedule, non-conference, and conference discussion, and maybe throw out some predictions as well. I don't know. Some people are weird about predictions. I got this weird guy, Clint Richardson of the Auburn Uniform Database, that he squeals every single time I try to get even just the minutest prediction out of him. Like, I asked him to predict Auburn versus Vanderbilt football one time when Auburn was, good, which wasn't too long ago, folks. And he still's like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. So are you a proponent of predictions, or are you kind of one of those that get squirmy about them?
I'll be somewhere in the middle. I actually understand where Clint's coming from there. I've never, to me, that's why the games are fun, right? Is you don't know, especially in college athletics. I think, you saw a good example of that last night. You just don't know. So, but in terms of the season overall, I think one thing we did on our preseason podcast was look at some of the big narratives, right? And I think you can, I'm totally cool leaning into maybe not game by game, run down the schedule,
right?
But I think big picture, where is this team? What is the ceiling? What is the floor? Kind of stuff like that. Yeah,
yep.
Definitely.
Yeah, ranges are definitely a lot easier to talk about, and we'll probably lean more into that type of stuff. We're not going to – I did a game-by-game prediction one year, not of basketball season, but I forget what it was. Maybe it was like the bowl game, and it took me like just hours to do it. And I was like, okay, Kyle, that was a stupid decision to even do that. Unbeaten Lake points out we won 28 games last year. That's an achievement to get that many wins, but is there a possibility we can win more this season? We will probably dive into that discussion just a little bit. Let's talk about the roster a little bit this year. No shock, Jabari, Walker Kessler are gone. Obviously, some other names like a Devin Cambridge are gone, which were very prominent on the roster too. So this is a team that's going to be a little bit different, not completely different, but different enough. And we've had a little bit of a preview, whether it was the games in Israel that they took during the summer, as I call it, because it was, towards the end of the summer there. The exhibition game. We've had a little bit of other opportunities just to kind of get to know some newcomers, such as a Janai Broom, such as a Chance Westry, and several other people like Yohan Traore. So when you look at this roster, Matt, what sticks out to you about it? Anything good, anything bad, strong points, weak points? What's your make of the roster?
So I think college basketball these days, with the transfer portal, with the constant movement of players, has become this. You have to have a coaching staff that can bring together new players and existing players and high schoolers and transfers and all these different pieces. And fortunately, if you're an Auburn fan watching this, I think this staff has shown that they are really great at bringing different groups together and molding around them within this culture that they've built. So for me, one of the storylines is you have all these returning long-term players in the program. Your Jalen Williams, your Alan Flanagan. We all got to know Wendell Green and Zep Jasper and KD Johnson last year. You've had this nucleus of guys who have been in the program. And then you bring in I think the three newcomers are fascinating for different reasons. Janai Broom, last year, he and Walker Kessler were very similar defensively in terms of blocks, in terms of defending the rim. And he brings an interesting offensive game that I think is different than what Walker brought. And then you've got Yohan Traore, the probably the most highly touted recruit coming in. How does he lean into that power forward position along with Jalen Williams there to try to replace Jabari? And then I'm so bummed that Chance Westry had the minor procedure and he's going to be out probably for the first week or two, because I think his versatility at the 1, the 2, and the 3. And where he's going to be on this roster once we get to SEC play is probably the most intriguing storyline to me. So a lot of pieces. This team has 13 scholarship players. They're going to play 10 or 11 guys. Tons of positional versatility on this team. And I think Bruce has been pretty honest that he still has a lot of decisions to make in terms of starting lineup, rotation, and all that.
Yeah, listening to his press conferences, he has at one point said, I've got 2 starting spots figured out. And then he went to SEC Media Days and said, I've got 1 spot figured out. So that tells you the level of competition that is happening. And, look, you addressed Chance Westry as a Town Maiden was asking about. Yeah, he's going to miss probably a few games here. I don't think that should be a shock to anybody. You want to take these things seriously and ease them back in. The great thing for Auburn's roster, they don't need to have Chance in there immediately. Like, they're not suffering. This wasn't you lost Walker Kessler and Jabari in, all at once. This was a team and a roster that's got a lot of other pieces that they can mold together until Chance becomes however he's going to fit into this lineup, starting or otherwise. So I'm glad that they're taking that at least slow to kind of work him back in there. And we've already seen some good things from Chance in the summer, so excited for that. I look at this roster, frankly, and I kind of think back to 2 things. I think I've got my timeline right here. The 2019 team or 2020 team, right after the Final Four, we had almost like a platoon system going, or you could have effectively. And Austin Wiley was in that second group, kind of as good a, he had his ups and his downs, but was a really good talent, a really good big man for us. Then you think back to the platoon system, at least in modern history, where that came from, Coach Calipari and Kentucky. I think Auburn's got the makings of a potential 2 platoon system here that can be very deadly. Not to say that you're going to have 5 guys and then the next 5 are going to come in and out traditionally. And they didn't even do that at Kentucky, and Bruce didn't do that traditionally 2 years ago when we had the ability to do that time. I just see so much talent, so many different varieties of talent, and it excites me because I don't care if the combination is, we'll just say Chance is healthy again, Chance Westry, Janai Broom, Yohan Traore, Wendell, and Zepp, or if it's, KD, Trey Donaldson, and whoever else you want to throw in there. You can literally mix and match, and you're going to get something special with any type of combination that you put with these guys. Now, what's going to be the best? That's the problem that Bruce is having, right? He's admitted it as much. And that's a really good problem to have. So don't expect that the amazing feats that you're going to see in these first few games, that's the starters. Not necessarily, my friend. Wait a little bit. Let's see what happens during this non-conference play. When we hit conference play, we're probably going to really know who is the best starting 5. Who's that 6th man that needs to come in right away, like Wendell was last year, and give us the change of pace? Who's your lead guy? You lost Jabari and Walker. Who is going to step up and be that person? By all accounts, Alan Flanagan seems to be ready to take that role again. We'll see if it continues forward. I just see so much to be excited about on this roster. And yes, I have my orange and blue glasses on. So, but if you had to pinpoint 3, however many, 2 or 3 players that really you're focusing on this year, who would they be?
So I think it all starts with Wendell Green Jr. I think your view of this team is very dependent on, do you think that Auburn's guards are good enough to get them where they want to go? We're going to be talking about that all year on our podcast. I can just tell you, but the people that we have on it, it's kind of a point of contention. Some people look at Auburn's guards, KD Johnson, Zep Jasper, Wendell Green, and say they're small. They're good defenders. They're kind of going to cause some havoc. But none of them shot particularly great from deep last year. All of them at times had limitations driving to the basket. So my question all offseason has been, well, can those guys get better? And I think that's a sarcastic question in a way. Like, I think people are forgetting Wendell's first year, Zep's first year at the Power 5 level. And then KD obviously, played at Georgia, and I think he was the most comfortable at times last year. But let me focus on Wendell though. If you go back to that streak last year when Auburn rose to number 1 in the country, Jabari was great. Walker was really a lot better than what we thought, I think he could be. But for me, when I remember those games, it was Wendell Green stirring the drink as the point guard when he would come in off the bench, like you said. And he just he kind of took the league by storm, to be honest, I think. And then as the second half of the SEC play, you see this with players kind of adjusting to the grind of that SEC schedule. He struggled a little bit. He got a minor injury. He was out for a game or 2. and he was never quite the same guy, just statistically and from a efficiency standpoint. Bruce and this staff has, if you look at the way they recruited, they have built this team around Wendell Green Jr., and they are totally comfortable with him being their point guard. It just seems very obvious to me.
Yep.
And I think they're betting that he's going to improve and that he is going to be able to carry the load that a Jared Harper did, handling the ball, running the offense, taking those big shots late in the shot clock when nothing else good is happening. So that is storyline number one for me, or player number one. I think this team will, in some ways, go as Wendell Green goes. So I'm really watching him closely. I think the other guy you have to look at is Allen Flanigan. So many different opinions. You know, you go from 2 years ago when he was basically the leading scorer, right? I mean, he was a great player during that down year, and he has the NBA athleticism that scouts want. Maybe he had the Achilles injury and he was never quite right last year. And how does he play? And how much pressure is he putting on himself to be that guy for his own professional hopes and dreams and to lead this team? I think that is going to be a very interesting storyline, especially in non-conference, to see how he's 100% healthy according to everybody. How does he play? Does he force anything? Or is he kind of a cohesive part of this group? But if you get all SEC level Allen Flanigan at the 3 position, well, I think that raises the ceiling of this team. So those are the 2 guys. And then Janai Broome, he has a post-up game inside. He's a tremendous shot blocker. I'm a little nervous. He's got a little bit of a bum ankle already, and he played in the exhibition and has kind of been in a boot since. And he probably will play Monday, but we're not totally sure. But I think, can he replace most of Kessler's production? And can he add a layer offensively that Auburn, he's probably the best post offensive player, I think, in the Bruce Pearl era in terms of back to the basket, throw it into him with 5 seconds on the shot clock, and he can get you a decent look. Maybe like a Wiley his senior year, like you mentioned. So those 3 guys, point guard, small forward, center, are 3 that I'm kind of tracking early in the season.
I like all those picks. I'm going to add one to our list here discussion, and that is I have a soft spot for guys who do what they're asked of them and wait for their opportunities, and even are given opportunities already, but maybe are now being expected more of them. Jalen Williams is that for me. I have been a Jalen Williams. The kids call it a stan these days, I think is what the terminology is on Twitter. I'd sound old when I'm saying that. I acknowledge. You can see my hairline right now on YouTube. I love me some Jalen Williams. We had the opportunity, the guys who previously did Inside the Jungle for us, they interviewed Miss Chantel Williams, his mother, and just talked about, you know, how great a kid he is, and you can see that out there. He had a great game in the exhibition. And we've seen some times, even last year, where he was, you know, one of the leading scorers or one of the most productive guys out there. I think it was Chris Oldenburg who said it, one of the former co-hosts for Inside the Jungle, called him the Swiss Army knife of Auburn basketball, because he is a power forward, for Auburn, but he can literally do anything that you want him to do and seems to always be where you need him to be. Not always perfect. Nobody's perfect. Not even Jabari was perfect. But to me, I am rooting for Allen Flanigan, obviously because of the story you've already talking about, but I'm rooting for Jalen Williams. I'm also rooting for a guy like Dylan Cardwell too, who's been in the background, is Mr. Auburn basically at this point, being the Jumbotron guy at the football games. To me, you can look at the star power and be super excited, but I think there are even more reasons to be excited about the players that sometimes not necessarily get forgotten about, but because there's a Janai Broome here, because of Wendell Green's coming on the way he is, because of Katie Johnson is just a Katie Johnson that takes all the attention in the world. We tend to forget about a Jalen Williams, a Dylan Cardwell, and we're leaving names out here. We've mentioned them before: Trey Donaldson, we've mentioned Chance, Zep
Jasper.
Zep Jasper. Is he going to give you 15 points a game? Probably not. But Zep Jasper comes out there and is a calming force. So I guess maybe to round out our discussion, I'd be interested to know from you on the discussion of Zep, with Wendell seemingly, and I agree with your assessment, taking that point guard position going forward. What is Zep's role going to be on this team?
Yeah, I'll talk about Zep, but I have to get some Jalen in too.
Go ahead. Yes.
I'll go Zep first. So One of the more interesting things preseason and in Israel was Zepp was only the 2 and 3 position in Auburn's offense is almost the same. There's some, you can call the bigger guy a 3, but they're basically the same. Zepp did not play point guard in Israel that I recall. Right. I watched all those games. Could be forgetting some of, but basically that told me like, whoa, they're going to play him at off guard, and I think that does a couple of things. He last year when everybody couldn't shoot and everybody was missing shots when Auburn's season started to tail off at the end. He was making open shots, and I think Bruce has had to encourage him to take those. There's going to be a lot of open shots for Zepp Jasper on this team with all the firepower that you mentioned. I think that's part of it. I think they love the idea of letting him pester some of these wings, even as a small guy. He's one of the best on-ball defenders in the country, and I think they want him to be able to maybe lean into that a little more and the shooting rather than having to handle the ball. And he was our starting point guard last year. He did a great job. He led us to an SEC championship. But just like you said, the flexibility and the value of, and by the way, he did score 15 points a game at College of Charleston. So he won't on this team because there's so many weapons, and he is the least selfish player. So very interested to see how that goes for him. I think he kind of served the team as the starting point guard last year, when I think this role probably fits him a tad better. So I'm optimistic about that. Jalen Williams, I thought maybe that's why you had me on the show. I don't know. I am one with you. Look, it's year 4 for him. He came on the scene as a freshman off the bench and just did these incredible things. It was wild his freshman year when he finally got some playing time. It's been an up and down journey for him. Sometimes he can disappear a little bit, but I think for people who, if you watch a lot of basketball and you understand the team concept and the idea of efficiency, and just your point average doesn't determine your worth on the basketball court.
Right.
I think, he is constantly up there in plus minus, meaning when he's on the floor, the team is doing well. That's not always a great stat to use, but he was tops the other night. He didn't miss a shot in the exhibition. He made his 1-3. He was, I think, 3 for 3 from the line. He was 6 for 6 from the field. He only played 12 minutes because he was in foul trouble. So I'm really excited about Jalen Williams. I hope that Johan being there and him dealing with Jabari last year at his position, I hope he can kind of like rise to that and really make the most of this senior year. And I think that maybe the storyline that isn't getting talked about enough is like exactly what you said at the 3, 4, and 5 position. Potentially, you've got Cardwell and Broom, returner and new guy, Jalen and Johan, returner and new guy, and then Flanagan and maybe Chance Westry, although I think he's going to play some 1 and 2 as well. Chance and Flanagan, returner and new guy. And how do those minutes get allocated? And how do those pieces come together to form, who's the best 5 players? What 5 are you going to close with this Auburn team? Who's going to be on the floor in the last 2 minutes? That's going to be fascinating as we start getting into these real games.
We could go on and on about this roster, but we do have to get on to the schedule discussion here. But I just want to say to our boys that we didn't get a chance to talk about, Chris Moore, we're watching you, my friend. Yep. We are watching you, and we are ready to see what you can do this year. Stretch, Leor Berman, Chandler Leopard, who's apparently lighting it up now. Even the guys, the walk-ons and everybody on the bench, we're excited for all of this.
And how about my namesake, I say in jest, but Trey Donaldson has acquitted himself really well. Like, I think Chance is probably going to be the backup point guard, maybe. But the way Trey played the other night and what we're hearing about him, maybe he takes those backup minutes when Wendell's off the floor, and Chance can just float wherever we want to put him. So, everybody on this team is dangerous, and in different ways. And you've never, in my lifetime, you've never been able to say that about the whole Auburn basketball roster.
Absolutely. The question is, how dangerous will they be for other teams? And that's what we're going to jump into right now. So we're going to do this in big bite-sized chunks, non-conference, SEC play. Let's talk about non-conference first. Obviously, the first game is tomorrow night, George Mason, 8 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN Plus. I think you can get it on SEC Network Plus too, if you have some type of thing right there. So not that we're going to spend every single moment on every single game here, but just for that first game, what are you anticipating seeing tomorrow night?
George Mason's a dangerous team. They've got the pedigree, obviously had some tournament runs in the past. They played Kansas, national champion last year, close. They beat a couple Power 5 teams last year. I think Auburn's about 11 or 12-point favorite tomorrow. There's some chances out probably. Janai Broome might be banged up. Bruce is nervous about this game. I mean, you could tell if you listen to any of his press conference stuff. He's nervous about everybody. But George Mason is not a team that's going to be easily intimidated. They have some players back that have been around. They've been on – you forget at these smaller schools, they're traveling on the road all the time. They're playing in these big venues all the time. That there's a lot of money involved in that, and going to bigger schools to play. So in some ways, I think tomorrow is a little more dangerous potentially than South Florida Friday, which is the second game. 2 games, both accessed television wise the same way as you described for this opening week, so everybody knows that. I think don't be shocked if it takes some time for this team to gel, and this is going to be their first real live action. I think Israel helps. I think that time probably helped them. But, you might be disappointed if you think Auburn's just going to roll the ball out and kick some butt tomorrow. I hope that happens, but be prepared because George Mason they're not UAH, and UAH is a good D2 team that kind of hung around with Auburn, hung within 10 or 20 points the other night. Yeah. So they're dangerous.
Well, and it is the Auburn way to play down to your opponent, it seems like, in everything that we do. We got to make it interesting, right? That's just our nature. I don't know why that is. Regardless, though, what Coach Pearl has done in terms of scheduling has been just a masterclass in how you manage a program too and prepare them for the future. When he goes and finds teams to play, he finds if you're going to put the rinky-dink teams, the people that think Auburn's supposed to roll over, he goes and finds the champions or the second place, the runners-up of last year's conference. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the same way this season, but at least they had some success coming off the last year. Or just a formidable team that's got a lot of leadership, that's got a lot of upperclassmen, that's going to have a lot of experience. So when you look at some of these teams and you're like, South Florida, sure. George Mason, sure. Winthrop, sure. Texas Southern, sure. Don't dismiss some of these things. There's a reason there's these teams on the schedule. Now, of course, Bruce put a few strategically in places to try to anticipate needing a little bit of an easier of a matchup. But don't think for a second that just because there's all this talent, there's all this flexibility, there's all this hype around this team, doesn't mean they're not going to get pushed, even in non-conference play. So when you look at the rest of the schedule for non-conference, what's the thing that sticks out to you? Matchups you like? Troublesome games? What sticks out to you?
Yeah, you make a great point. I believe the last time I checked, there's only 2, if you're familiar with kind of the metrics and how NCAA tournament resumes are kind of built, there's only 2 quad 4 games on this schedule all year.
Right.
And that's the lowest, kind of the worst teams. I forget who those 2 are. But you might look at this non-conference and be like, well, we're not playing in Maui and we're not playing, these huge basketball blue bloods or anything like that. It's a more dangerous schedule than you think for exactly the reason you said. A lot of these teams have March experience. They have tournament experience. The ones that kind of stand out to me, I'm really fascinated by the St. Louis rematch right after, I think it's the day after the Iron Bowl, actually. That was a great game on the road in St. Louis last year. Leor Berman came off the bench and hit a huge 3, I think, late. Yuri Collins is put one of the best point guards in the country for St. Louis. They're coming into Auburn for the return trip. That's a big one. Somebody, one of the viewers mentioned the Memphis game in Atlanta. Obviously, maybe not as much now, but a few years ago, that was like the recruiting battle. That was our rival, was Memphis. Right. They were going after a lot of the same guys we were. They've had not nearly as much success with Penny Hardaway so far. And that's in Atlanta. Auburn's going to show up for that game. And then you got to mention the West Coast swing, kind of the week before Christmas, going to USC and to Washington back to back. Those are especially USC was a 5 seed last year in the tournament. I mean, yeah, it's a top 25 type team. I'm not going to pretend like I know everything about their roster this year yet. We'll get there in a few weeks. And Washington actually I do know a little bit about them. I love Jim Boeheim in the Syracuse zone, and one of his top assistants is there, the head coach. And we played them a couple years ago and won by 20 or 25. So West Coast trip's big. Memphis matchup is big. St. Louis is, bigger and harder than you think. And then keep in mind those little teams. Winthrop has been in the tournament a lot over the years. Texas Southern, I think, is always in that first four, it seems like, every year when the tournament gets under. So kind of take the time, if you're becoming a basketball fan, if you're getting into it, don't just look at the name, kind of like you were saying. Kind of find some of the pedigree of these teams, and they get to play Auburn. And that's what's different now. They look at that as like a huge opportunity to go beat an Auburn, especially if it's in Auburn Arena where Auburn didn't lose last year. Like we get to go try to beat them on their home court in one of the toughest environments of college basketball. So you're the hunted. I think that's one of the storylines for the non-conferences. Can Auburn handle that? Can they maturely go through each game, prepare for each game, and kind of not play down to some teams that maybe they should take care of business against?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, I don't know if you're an Avengers fan or anything like that, but they sent the message out to the world that they're ready for a higher form of warfare. And so that's what's happened with Auburn basketball. You're ready. Here we come. We're all going to come after you now. So it doesn't matter if it's Winthrop. It doesn't matter if it's Memphis at a neutral site. It doesn't matter if it's out there at USC at the I forget the name of their arena, but out there playing. Everyone is going to give you their best, ready to take down the mighty Auburn Tigers and their meme army on Twitter, which
that's a great point. Don't forget about the SEC Big 12 Challenge too, kind of mixed in conference play, going to Morgantown on a Saturday morning. Again, if you're kind of anywhere, Tennessee, West Virginia, like what a great opportunity to go watch Auburn play up there.
Yeah, and I think people, see, I dismissed it too, because I always forget. There's part of me that hates that it's in the middle of conference play, and then there's part of me that loves it. It's a nice little break, but there's almost like that part of me that wants that to be the end cap on non-conference play officially, like at the very end of the schedule. Big 12, SEC, this is the last crack at your non-conference before you go into SEC play to like kick everything off for both of the conferences. But I think that one is getting looked over because of West Virginia's struggles last year. Bob Huggins, don't dismiss him. There's a reason that Bob Huggins' name is synonymous with basketball, especially in Morgantown. So, yeah, really the story for me is not just the threats that are on Auburn's schedule in the non-conference play, but the travel that they have taken. Israel, the Cancun Challenge, Los Angeles, Seattle, back to Atlanta, and other places as well that they'll be traveling throughout conference play. This is going to be a well-traveled, well-tested team on the road. So hopefully when we get into a tournament, we will not struggle a little bit as we had before. So smart scheduling by Bruce Pearl. We'll see how it pans out. So if you had to pick, and this is where we kind of get in predictions a little bit. If you want to throw out a record, you can. You're more than welcome to. But if you had to maybe pick, because I think we both feel this is going to be a somewhat successful, if not very successful, non-conference for the Auburn Tigers. What are some of those maybe 1 or 2 games or 3 games, however many you think that Auburn could drop out of non-conference?
Well, I think it starts with the West Coast trip. Winning on the road is really hard in college basketball. I think we all know that from the positive end with people coming into Auburn at this point. But you might remember Auburn traveled to like USF last year and couldn't make a shot. I mean, it was just an ugly, ugly game. And that ended up, ironically enough, I think it was in the same arena that the SEC tournament was in last year. We couldn't make a shot in that same building in March. So definitely the USC game to me, if Auburn gets that one, don't take that lightly. Like that'd be a really good win. I think Memphis, just from the sake of they always have some really good players. I don't think they always use those cohesively. I think that could be dangerous. St. Louis, they outplayed us last year. I'm just gonna, we kind of stole one late, had to come back and rally. Those would be a few that kind of have my attention as potential pitfalls. And you just kind of know, if you've watched college basketball enough, that one of those early 4 or 5 games that look so easy, maybe it's in Cancun against a Bradley team that is a basketball school. I mean, they play basketball, they have for a long time. Or a Liberty who's been in the tournament that we might play in day 2 of that tournament. Or maybe you play Northwestern, a Big Ten team there in the second day, depending on how everything shakes out. I just feel like there's going to be 1 or 2 of those games that maybe seem a little innocent, that get way uncomfortable, and you hope you pull them out. And then the USC game in St. Louis, I think if I had to pick 2, are the 2 that I would be pretty wary of.
here's what I'm doing to kind of ready myself for the dynamic that it is dealing with an Auburn basketball season, as great and fun as it is. I'm preparing myself for one disappointment and one loss that's not going to be surprising. And I think you pointed out some, very key factors and where you look for that. I think that West Coast trip could be very dangerous for Auburn, even that USC, maybe even Washington, their place. Yeah, it's been a minute since we were doing this home and home thing that we were supposed to already have done, but maybe they're still pretty raw about what we did to them in Auburn Arena. I was there and I witnessed it. It was a great game for us, not for them. Some very loud Washington fans that I'll tell you, it's like, do you know where you are? You're really far from home. You better want to settle down a little bit there. So I think, you look at that, the West Coast trip, the Memphis is probably your more obvious potential losses if that does happen. And then you look at maybe some of these teams that might catch Auburn a little bit off guard. They're a little smaller by most people's eyes. The general fan looks at St. Louis and like, who's that? I'm like, but if you're a basketball fan, you know who St. Louis is.
Right.
So I'm preparing myself for 2 losses out of this non-conference schedule. I think they are completely capable, very confident they can get through unscathed. Where do you kind of sit on that? Are you going to lean more 2 or more losses than that?
I think with this team, it would be disappointing if they lost more than 2 of those, maybe, including the West Virginia game. It's very possible Auburn will be favored in all of these games. I think it's just that concern. Basketball is weird. Upsets happen. That's why we love it. Not as fun when you're the good team and you have to really, if a team comes in and hits 15 threes. By the way, the big question with this team that we haven't touched on yet is, can we make enough outside shots?
Yep.
I mean, that is the storyline. So that makes you more vulnerable to worse teams because of the way the game is played and the power of the 3-point shot. But I would say for me personally, 1 to 2 losses is kind of what I have penciled in my head. And I think that's fine, really, no matter where they fall. The goal is to be hitting and figure out all the questions we have going into conference play. For me.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the great thing about conference play. If you drop a few, if you have a little bit of a less than stellar non-conference, it doesn't necessarily eliminate you, because especially when you play the SEC, which has just risen into the level that most people would just kind of dismiss them from. It's just Kentucky. Don't worry about the SEC. My friends, it's no longer just Kentucky. Kentucky's really kind of I don't call it a forethought now, but people are mainly talking about Auburn, about Arkansas, about Tennessee, and there's Kentucky because we're just used to talking about them as well. And, Alabama tries to do a few things every once in a while. They kind of bite themselves in the butt every once in a while. But the SEC is a very tough conference to play in these days. And I want us to spend some time now talking about that a little bit in more detail. So it does get started, not at the turn of the new year, right before it this year. Wednesday, the 28th, will be our first conference game versus Florida in Auburn Arena. That is going to be an interesting one with the storylines that surround that. Todd Golden, former assistant coach of Bruce Pearl. You heard Bruce talk about him at SEC Media Days. You could feel the love between the 2 of those guys. And Bruce just finds ways to bring himself to tears, not because he's trying to, but because he just has all of these relationships that he's built. And it's almost nice now to see what we talk about in football a lot about coaching trees. You look at the Nick Saban coaching tree that's spread out now. I mean, maybe Bruce is starting to kind of build that with Todd Golden getting his shot at Florida. I will admit, I was a little shocked when they decided to go that route, but he obviously had some great success out in their West Coast. So again, we won't go through each one of these, but because it is the first game of SEC, where do you feel Auburn is sitting at? How does it affect this game starting off conference play with Florida?
Yeah, so the way that falls, it's right after the West Coast trip. They have Christmas, and then it's December 28th. Students aren't back. They'll come back. I know the jungle will be there, but it's different, and that's why I kind of was hinting at. I hope by the time we go to USC and Washington that this team is starting to gel. Roles are being defined. People are comfortable in them because it starts quick now. There is an opportunity to start fast in SEC play. If you just kind of look through, it's home against Florida, at Georgia, huge one against Arkansas, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then at Ole Miss, Mississippi State, at LSU, South Carolina, Georgia. So, I mean, if you look at the first half of the schedule, if Auburn is playing the way we think they might be capable, they actually need to start fast, because if you look at the back half, that's where a lot of the really big landmines are that look like landmines right now. But that Arkansas game, which is the first Saturday home game in January, I think it's I forget what the day is, but it
is the 7th, January
the
7th.
third conference game. Arkansas has a ton of top recruits. They have a ton of hype. They've been to the Elite Eight the last 2 years. Haven't done as much in the regular season in the league, but a lot of people have them in Kentucky as the 2 teams this year. Huge opportunity for Auburn to defend home court. That's the only time we play Arkansas this year is at home, which is huge. If Auburn can somehow beat Florida, beat Georgia, and then pull that one, and then you're sitting at 3-0 and you have a tiebreaker against Arkansas, well, we might be looking at, okay, well, how can Auburn stay in this race and try to defend their SEC title? So I think that Arkansas game, everybody needs to circle it. Huge game, especially if we were to lose one of the first 2. I just think that is going to be the first big Saturday basketball game of the year, and it needs to be bananas. You remember what Arkansas was like? They took away our number 1 ranking, broke the, gave us a huge loss there, and they celebrated it very hard. And I think this is time for Auburn to try to get that one back.
We might have a Pearlville 2.0, although he doesn't want it to be called that. What an experience that was. I literally dropped everything that I was doing last year for that Kentucky game, which ended up being Pearlville, and just I got to go see this for myself. And when I walked up on students just living in just whatever they could for the next 24 to 48 hours, really, because it started almost 48 hours before it, I had never in my life seen anything like that. So I'm not advocating that y'all all suffer the way you did last year in the cold, but man, that passion, that drive, we need that for this game coming up with the Arkansas. I think you hit the nail on the head. This has the potential to set Auburn up for so much success going forward. Not necessarily makes it easier for them, but it gives them a little bit of a cushion that they're going to need for the rest of the season, because there are landmines coming up. There are opportunities for Auburn to take a few losses in SEC play. And I really, really hope that they can take advantage of what's going to be an emotional start for Bruce, especially with Florida. We all expect Georgia probably to, roll over like dogs should.
But you think about last year, and this is why the league is so
true.
tough now. I mean, Auburn had to just fight and claw, and Wendell kind of saved the day with one of the weirdest, ugliest game-winning shots you'll ever see down the stretch in Athens, and that's where that second game is. So you're right, but every game in this league, man, is just not fun. The talent level has gone up so much.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be interesting taking a walk further down the schedule. You look at some of these other games coming up. We obviously talked about West Virginia right in the middle of it. Texas A&M, for me, we played them twice this year. It's kind of one of those teams that you just don't know what you're going to get. You dismissed them all during the regular season, and you saw what they did in the SEC tournament and got snubbed from the postseason play. So don't overlook them in any way. We all know what the Tennessee game means to Bruce. We all know what it means to us personally, and the connection with all of that going on. You get 2 cracks at him this year, one away to start off the year. And then, listen, there are times that I look at a schedule when it comes out, and I'm like, you guys, you knew what you were doing putting the Tennessee game and the Auburn game as the last game of the season for both teams. That tells me something right there. Yes, Kentucky and Arkansas are expected to be the top, right? But there's something about an Auburn-Tennessee game that's been pretty magical in the past. So I guess let me get your honest opinion, somewhat of a prediction here. How confident are you that final game with Tennessee to end the year could decide an SEC regular season title? Do you think it's a high probability, or do you think it's going to lie with the other 2 teams?
I think it's a possibility for sure. Like I mentioned, if Auburn could get off to a good start in SEC play and kind of almost pace the field a little bit and be right there with whoever that team is that starts out 6-0, 7-0, then they're going to have a shot. I think if I was like an analytics nerd on the basketball team and we were talking with the coaches, we said, all right, what should our reasonable goal be? The last 3 conference games are at Kentucky, which if you want to have some fun, look at Auburn's history in Rupp Arena in basketball. Not great. At Kentucky, in Tuscaloosa, and then hosting Tennessee. I mean, that's brutal 3 games right there. Every team in the SEC has a brutal stretch. Ours is at the very end. So I think the goal for Auburn should be like, can Auburn be in the hunt after game 15, in the conference play with 3 to go? And then you take your shots, right? Maybe you have to go to Kentucky and win that game to have a chance at the title. Maybe you don't. Maybe you have to beat Alabama and then beat Tennessee at home to have a share of the conference title. There's so many scenarios, I think. But if you're just watching and watching this season play out, like, can Auburn just get to those last 3 with a chance? And I think, honestly, the schedule plays out okay. We were on this last year. One of the things people don't talk about enough with the way the league is scheduling-wise is who do you play twice? And Auburn, this year, they always play Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss twice. This year, the 2 that they play twice are Tennessee, which is hard, and A&M, which is getting harder. Buzz Williams is doing a great job out there. But you only play Kentucky once. You only play Arkansas once, and you host them. There are some decent advantages here in terms of our schedule. Maybe not advantages. It's not stacked against us in any way. So, sorry, that's a long answer, but I think if Auburn can get to that last 3 in the hunt, I think that would be a tremendous year, and it would give us a lot of fun stuff to talk about as fans.
Yeah, it's going to be fun start into this season. Not that there's not great opportunities. Like we said, there's the Alabama-Tennessee matchup in the middle of that. Texas A&M is going to be fun to watch. This is not a time where Auburn goes into a conference play and you're just waiting for that Kentucky matchup or you're just waiting for the Tennessee matchup. This is a year where Auburn needs to be on guard the entire year especially because of what's going to happen in those final 3 games, 2 of them on the road. So when you look at this conference play, what do you think? Can Auburn be the regular season title? Like, what is your percentage confidence on that?
Yeah. Are they one of the 5 or 6 teams that can win it? I think yes. I think that's completely fair. Is it going to be, Kentucky and Arkansas have squads. Now, you can argue Kentucky always has a squad, and Auburn's done okay there. True. But we don't host them this year, which has been a house of horrors for Kentucky coming into Auburn to play, and you got to go there. It's going to be tough, but I feel great about the fact that I do think this is a team that can compete. Bruce has shown every year. I think we almost every year have exceeded expectations. Where Auburn's picked 5th in the league by the coaches and by the media, I believe. I think they could be a top 3, top 4 team. And if you're there, you're going to have a shot. So that's the goal, right? I don't want people to forget Auburn is the defending SEC champions, and they won it outright last year. So I guarantee you within that locker room, that's what they're talking about.
Yep.
They're not an underdog in their mind. They're going to play up the underdog thing. Nobody thinks they're going to repeat. Nobody thinks our guards are any good. We lost Jabari and Walker. Poor Auburn. They're not going to be any good. Bruce is like the master at that. I think they will have an opportunity to compete for the regular season. And I think Auburn is at a point now as a program where that should kind of be the goal. Kind of like winning the West in football, right? Like that's always the goal. It's just, can you find a way to survive the West and win it and get to Atlanta, and everything will kind of work itself out from there.
Yeah.
For basketball, can you win the league? And if you win the league, you've had a great year. So I think that's kind of the goal.
Yep. I really look at it in my mind. If Auburn finishes outside the top 4, it's not necessarily that this is a failure of a season or a disappointment necessarily, but it is it doesn't meet expectations, because I feel like we are capable of being even at that number 4 spot. If that means Tennessee, Arkansas, and Kentucky are ahead of us in whatever order that is. It's highly plausible that could happen, but it's also highly plausible that they could be at the very top of it as well. And they will compete like they are defending their lives out there for that regular season championship. Very briefly, let's talk about some postseason. It's really hard to talk about postseason without the season being played. So it's really just speculative at this point. We're planning on them being the SC tournament and being at least competitive. Now, that didn't work out so well last year. I think this is going to be one of those years personally in the SEC tournament where Bruce is going to really sit these guys down and said, guys, y'all showed up in the regular season, but you haven't showed up in the postseason. And teams are different. Obviously, you count for all that. I'm not calling SEC tournament championship. That's not what I'm saying, but I am calling for a year where Auburn comes into the SEC tournament and actually looks like they belong to be there and not just phoned it in after the regular season title was in hand. Any thoughts or opinions that you can offer about the tournament?
Well, I think it's a great point. It's been feast or famine, right? First year you had that amazing run with KT Harrell and them, and you obviously had, the leading up to the Final Four, they swept through that SEC tournament and were hitting on all cylinders. But other than that, there have been some pretty down moments in the SEC tournament. Now, if you had to pick one piece, the NCAA tournament, regular season, or SEC tournament, you'd pick the SEC tournament to not do great at, honestly.
Right.
I think the regular season matters and is a lot more important, and you should be a lot more proud when you win that. I think the big thing is can Auburn be peaking at the right time, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's hard to do. Everybody wants to do that. It's such a March-driven sport. I agree with you, though. I think a big goal would be to be that top 4 teams in the regular season to get the double bye. So you only have to play quarterfinals and on Friday. Right. It's back in Nashville, which I'm pumped. It's in Nashville for the next 10 years, the SEC tournament. So
yes,
excited about that.
It feels right being in Nashville, frankly. Right. I think it just feels like the epicenter of basketball. You kind of understand why in football it's in Atlanta, even though it's a far piece from Missouri and things like that. With Kentucky being the traditional power, it just feels right in Nashville.
It's a great place to host too. I think that the city does a good job with it, and I'm excited about that selfishly. Yep. But then last year was a really tough look in the SEC tournament, and the way that team, just got whipped against Miami in the second round of the NCAA tournament. You'll hear in basketball a lot that the best coaches and programs are making second weekend trips in the NCAA tournament a lot. So if I had to put a goal on it, I think Bruce would say the same thing. Final Fours are great. They're really hard to get to. Ask Kentucky. It's been a while. Ask some of these teams that are historically great. It's hard to get to Final Fours. I mean, there's a reason Auburn had never done it until recently. Alabama's never done it. It's just hard. But can you be a team that's consistently getting to the second weekend, the Sweet 16? If you are doing that, you have a very good team, and you're going to put yourself in position to have those opportunities. So for me, can this be a Sweet 16 team that can survive a weekend of an NCAA tournament? Absolutely. I think they've got that ability. But they're going to need to be healthy. They're going to need to gel together really well with all these different pieces, and we're going to have to make shots. And the big question, Bruce's offense is not the most fancy X's and O's wise. Can Auburn be a high-scoring team, and can they hit enough outside shots to make people respect that? And that's kind of the key. But win a game in the SEC tournament, I think, is fair. And can you try to get to the Sweet 16?
Absolutely. So let me push you a little bit further here. Because I love to do this with people on predictions and stuff. And we are just saying this here at the start of the season.
Yep.
We don't know how this thing's going to go. We don't know about injuries. We don't know about records or anything like that. You've already stepped out and said that you feel like Sweet 16 is highly possible for this team. I heard you correct, right?
Yep. Definitely.
How confident about an Elite Eight do you feel?
See, then it becomes all about matchup.
Right.
Look, that team, people forget the beauty of college basketball is that Final Four team that we will always love forever was 7-7 in league play and getting walloped and not playing good basketball at all in late February. Mm-hmm. And they found something the last 4 regular season games, and they went all the way. They should have won the national title. They got, robbed. So that should show you that you can't predict this stuff. But do we have enough high-end talent? If we can compete with Kentucky and Arkansas in the league, and we'll see on the court if that's a possibility, then sure. Why can't you make an Elite Eight? Why can't you make another Final Four? The one Auburn made was so unexpected that I think we all have to acknowledge that crazy things can happen. Last year, it looked like Auburn had this great team that had so much promise, and they ran into a couple buzzsaws and quit hitting shots, and it was all over just like that. So it's the beauty and the pain of March. But it's possible, and if I had to put a prediction on league record, I'm somewhere in the 12-6 range, which is probably a 4th or 5th place finish. That's kind of just gut. I don't think this is quite a 14-4 SEC champion team on paper yet that I've seen, but the pieces are there to compete. So that's where I'm curious, can Bruce and the staff elevate them to get those 2 or 3 wins that they're going to have to get to try to win the league?
Yeah, I think that's a fair SEC record, and I think that's a fair assessment of the postseason play. To me, I kind of used to make the statement. I'll kind of continue to do that this year. It's again, I don't mean disappointment in a harsh way, but I kind of just the sentiment behind it. I am expecting this team to make a tournament, the NCAA tournament, to get past the first and second rounds to the Sweet 16. At that point, you really, like you said, it comes down to who else is left and who else is hot at that point, which is the beauty of March Madness and why we love it so much. So I'm just looking forward to this year. So excited for just watching how this team's going to mold together, who's going to be playing with who most of the time, who's that sixth man, who's going to be the leader on this team in terms of, the energy, who's going to be the leader in terms of scoring. There's not going to be another Jabari. There's not going to be another Walker, but there's still a Dylan Cardwell. There's still an Alan Flanagan. There's still a Yawan Traore. They could be the next great things at Auburn. We'll just have to wait and see. So as we close out our show, I want to give you a minute or two here just to kind of pump your podcast, tell folks where they can find you, Matt, because we want to make sure that they come check you out.
Well, first of all, just thank you, Kyle. This was a lot of fun. I think everybody's excited about basketball. It's great to chat with you, and would love to keep chatting in the future. If you're interested in just kind of a fan perspective after game reaction podcast, that's what we do at the Jungle. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, all that good stuff. We try to have a game recap, kind of an hour or so, just talking through what happened in the game, looking through the players and the roles and what we're seeing on the court. Try to do that after every game, and that's kind of been our thing. We try to get it out pretty quick so you can have it for the next morning on a commute, something like that. There's me and Jackson are the two main guys, and a couple of our friends are going to be helping with the duty of doing that each night. So maybe we don't have to every game. So there'll be kind of a team of us doing that. Love to have it. We've had a lot of interviews on. Actually had Coach Pearl on a week ago. So pretty stoked about that still. That's pretty cool for us regular people. So had a lot of cool interviews. So you can go back in our records and check some of that out if you want some content before the season starts. But I'm just thrilled with what you do. And, this whole community rallying around this basketball program as it continues to grow. You mentioned Pearlville, so many cool manifestations of how Bruce has just captured the community's attention. And it's just continuing to knock down all these ceilings that we thought this program had. So hopefully we get another year of success this year. We'll find out soon.
Yeah, it's a good experiment in showing what's true about when you love the Auburn family, they will love you back. And Bruce Pearl has shown that time and time again here. His investment in us, our reinvestment in him, effectively putting him into a lifetime contract. It's going to be fun. I'm super excited for this year. Excited for y'all on the Jungle podcast. Excited for us here at E2C Network, talking basketball all season. It's going to be a busy one. We're going to have some highs and lows, folks, but just stick around for the ride because we're all looking forward to March Madness regardless. For myself here at E2C Network, thank you for joining us. Thank you to Matt again for joining us here and hanging out with us, talking about the wonderful world of Auburn basketball. Until we talk to you guys again, War Eagle.
War Eagle.